This video was brought to you by CuriosityStream. Sign up now and get our streaming service Nebula absolutely free, where you can get exclusive TLDR videos and an extended version of our new show, The Daily Briefing, where we first discussed this story yesterday. On Tuesday, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Chancellor Rishi Sunak were issued with fixed penalty notices in relation to lockdown parties, and have therefore broken the law while in office. At the time of writing, it's not known exactly which party Sunak's fine relates to, but Number 10 have confirmed that Johnson's fine relates to his birthday party on the 19th of June 2020. Now, fines being issued was always a possibility, and it even looks like Johnson might have been anticipating this outcome. That's because in the last couple of weeks, he's conspicuously refused to say whether receiving a fine would amount to breaking the law. And for those of you who aren't lawyers, obviously receiving a fine does mean that he broke the law. Nonetheless, this is all completely unprecedented, and could mark the end for both Johnson and Sunak. Although it's not necessarily that likely. It's worth starting though with some context. As you're probably aware, various parties were held inside Downing Street and Whitehall during COVID lockdowns, in contravention of the coronavirus regulations in place at the time. For a while now, the police have been investigating 12 of these parties, and began issuing fines a few weeks ago, technically known as fixed penalty notices, or FPNs, with these being issued to individuals who attended parties and violated the rules. Before yesterday, the police had issued 20 fines to those working in government and Whitehall. But yesterday, they issued an additional 30 fines, bringing the total up to 50. A couple of hours after this was announced, though, it was announced that Johnson and Sunak were among those to have received an FPN. At the time of writing, we don't know how many fines Johnson and Sunak received, or the cost of those fines, but police reports seem to imply that they each only received one. However, Johnson has attended, or is alleged to have attended, 6 parties, which could put him on the hook for over 12 grand's worth of fines. And this figure could rise even higher if any of these gatherings was designated to be a large gathering, which would then add a further £10,000 to the total fine. Anyway, precise figures aside, an FPN doesn't constitute a criminal conviction or being charged with a crime, but it does mean that you've broken the law, and COVID-related FPNs are considered serious. The Crown Prosecution Service explicitly stressed in its guidance on COVID regulations that given that the offences in regulations are related to measures imposed to prevent the spread of infection throughout the UK and potentially high incidences of serious illness and death, they should be considered serious. Home Secretary Priti Patel even stressed this point at a Downing Street press conference in early 2021.
But there is still a small minority who refuse to do the right thing. And to them, my message is clear. If you don't follow these rules, then the police will enforce them. Police officers are now moving more quickly to handing out fines when they encounter breaches, and they have my absolute backing in doing so. As we have done throughout this pandemic, we are constantly reviewing our approach to ensure that we can crack down on those most serious cases of rule breaking.
Patel wasn't the only one to emphasise this, though. The news at the time was full of people who broke the law being shamed, pursued by police and convicted for their actions, with very little sympathy for rule breakers coming from the government or the public at the time. Regardless, it can't be stressed enough how unprecedented all of this is. Although it isn't the first time that a Prime Minister has been involved in a police matter. After all, Tony Blair was questioned by the police over the Cash for Honours scandal, but this is the first time that a sitting PM has been caught breaking the law. While this might sound like a somewhat partisan or anti-conservative thing to say, these are just the facts. The Prime Minister and the government made the rules, and then they broke them. That doesn't mean that Johnson is on the way out though, or at least not necessarily, and there are 3 things that might save his job. The first being Ukraine. At the beginning of the year, the newspapers and airwaves were full of people talking about Partygate, and while it is still a big story now, it's been somewhat overshadowed by the war in Ukraine, with a number of newspapers this morning using it as an excuse for the Prime Minister's actions. And this clearly horrendous loss of life in Ukraine does allow the government to say that this is being blown out of proportion, and claim that this entire thing is purely political, especially as a lot of the public anger surrounding the parties has had time to burn off since it was first announced. First time round, people certainly were angry. Public polling in the run-up to the first tranche of notices was incredibly clear. A poll conducted by Redfield and Wilton towards the beginning of February found that nearly 2/3 of people believed that Johnson should quit if he was found to have broken the law. And if you're thinking that the war in Ukraine might have changed or distracted things, then think again. A poll conducted towards the end of March by Savanta Comres still had 64% of people saying that the Prime Minister should go if issued with a fine. Now, Johnson will probably argue that he can't resign at the moment because of Russia's ongoing invasion of Ukraine, but it's not clear how long this defence will hold up, with Chamberlain trending on Twitter very soon after the announcement, alluding to the fact that Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain was removed from office during the midst of World War II, no less. Regardless, the number of voters backing Johnson's removal is slipping, and there's a real disparity between those who agree that he lied about breaking the law knowingly and those who actually want to see him gone. It seems then that people might be more forgiving now than they were previously. And even if Ukraine isn't enough to shield the Prime Minister long term, then what about recess? Because if you're looking forward to a big showdown in PMQs this afternoon, then I'm afraid I've got bad news for you. MPs are currently on their Easter break, and this helps Johnson because it stops MPs from being able to easily plot against him and limits the amount of airtime that the opposition will get for stunts and shows of anger. The theory being that once they're back in Parliament, like the public, some of the initial anger might have subsided, allowing clearer heads to prevail. The third thing protecting the Prime Minister, though, is the double fining. It's certainly bad for the Conservatives that both the Prime Minister and Chancellor got fined. It limits their ability to silo the issue and makes clear this was a government-wide problem. But while it's bad for the party, it's good for Johnson. When this issue first emerged in January, Sunak looked like a clear successor to Johnson and came out of the scandal fairly unscathed. But the last few weeks haven't been kind to Sunak, with first issues surrounding the spring statement, then his wife's tax status, and now a fine which taints his reputation as well as the Prime Minister. In fact, Sunak's star has fallen so hard that he's gone from the most popular Tory among Conservative voters to third from bottom, with only a 7.9 rating from his own party's voters. Obviously then, this muddies the water as to who could actually take over if MPs decided to oust Johnson. And this uncertainty may well make Conservative MPs more cautious about submitting their letters of no confidence. When there was a clear successor in place, that was reassuring, but now they might fear that removing Johnson could damage their party yet further, especially in the run-up to local elections. So, will Johnson resign? Well, he's obviously coming under massive political pressure. Not only is Johnson the first Prime Minister in history to break the law, but an astonishing 50 people inside his government did the same thing. But the factors we've run through certainly do help his shelf life. Ultimately though, like I mentioned, quite a lot of this relied on Rishi Sunak. If Sunak had decided to resign, then it would have put immense pressure on Johnson to do the same thing. But despite both issuing official apologies, both Sunak and Johnson have insisted that they won't be going anywhere, and were, instead, focused on delivering for the British people, which does take some pressure off the Prime Minister. Now, as always, it's a fool's game to predict how things will play out in British politics. Something could always come up which forces Johnson out of number 10 early, despite his insistence that he won't resign. But for the moment, it seems that these factors, and maybe some others, have dampened the blow of this, even if the public are still clearly angry. All in all, this is likely to be bad news for an already damaged Conservative Party, especially a matter of weeks out from local elections. Power now then, for better or worse, rests in the hands of Conservative MPs. Do they think Johnson is toxic enough to demand a change at the top? Or would they prefer to keep things stable ahead of an already worrying-looking local election? And we don't know which way it falls yet. But if you want to be updated on this story as it plays out, then you should subscribe to the Daily Briefing YouTube channel, where we initially reported on this story as it broke yesterday. I even made a fun little breaking news graphic and everything. Anyway, the Daily Briefing is our show where we break down the 5 news stories you need to know about each day in just 5 minutes. Kind of like your daily news vitamins to get you in the know quickly. Now, if you're interested, then you can watch it on the Daily Briefing YouTube channel, or you can listen by searching in your favorite podcast app. But if you want the extended version of the show, that's an extra 10 minutes every single day and an ad-free experience, then you'll want to sign up to our streaming service Nebula. There you'll also find all kinds of exclusive TLDR videos which will never make it to YouTube, and all of our latest videos ad-free. And if you're interested, then I've got good news, because we partnered with CuriosityStream, the home of the best documentaries online. Thanks to them, you can get both streaming services. That's CuriosityStream for all the docs you could want, and Nebula for bonus TLDR for less than $15 a year. That's a wild deal, and a 26% discount on their already low price. So get yourself a ton of documentaries and exclusive content from your favorite creators, including the Daily Briefing Extended Edition, by signing up using the link below. Thanks for your support.